February 23, 1945, 11:47 a.m., Mount Suribachi, Iwo Jima. Private First Class. Richard Clawitter crouches behind a volcanic rock outcrop, 70 pounds of pressurized napalm strapped to his back. The M2 flamethrower feels like carrying a bomb with a lit fuse. Ahead, 30 yards up the slope, a Japanese pillbox has already killed 11 Marines this morning. Machine gun fire rips through the black sand in methodical bursts. Clawitter's hands shake, not from fear of the enemy, but from what he's about to become. In 4 minutes, statistically, he'll be dead. Flamethrower operators don't last long, but neither do the men hiding in that concrete tomb. Before we continue with Richard Clawitter's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Iwo Jima, February 23, 1945, where Richard Clawitter was about to unleash something the Japanese called Tatsu Jigoku, the Hell Dragon. Richard Clawitter grew up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, where his father ran a small metalworking shop. At 17, Richard could weld, cut, and shape steel with precision that impressed journeymen twice his age. He understood heat, understood how metal behaved under extreme temperatures, understood the physics of combustion in ways most farm boys didn't. When Pearl Harbor happened, Richard was 18, 5'7", and weighing 140 pounds, soaking wet. The Marine Corps recruiter looked at his slight frame with skepticism. "You sure about this, kid?" Richard signed the papers anyway. By late 1943, Richard found himself in the 4th Marine Division, training for island warfare in the Pacific. The training was brutal, but nothing prepared him for the reality of Japanese fortifications. The enemy had learned from earlier defeats. No more banzai charges, no more wasteful frontal assaults. Instead, they dug. They carved elaborate tunnel systems into volcanic rock and coral limestone. They built reinforced concrete pillboxes with interlocking fields of fire. They created positions that could withstand naval bombardment and aerial bombing. And American Marines died, trying to root them out, one bunker at a time. The statistics were staggering. On Tarawa in November 1943, it took 76 hours to secure an island 2 miles long. Over 1 EU Marines died. The casualty rate for units assaulting fortified positions exceeded 40%. Traditional infantry tactics, rifle fire, grenades, satchel charges, proved horrifically inefficient. A single Japanese machine gun nest could pin down an entire platoon for hours, even days. Direct assault meant certain death. Bombardment rarely worked. The enemy simply went deeper underground. Something had to change. Richard saw his first flamethrower demonstration in Hawaii, March 1944. The Marine Corps had begun deploying the M1A1 model, a portable unit that shot a stream of burning fuel approximately 25 yards. It was effective, terrifying, and absolutely necessary for Pacific warfare. But it had problems. The range was too short, forcing operators into point-blank proximity with enemy positions. The ignition system was unreliable, sometimes failing at the worst possible moment. And the fuel mixture, standard gasoline thickened with rubber, didn't burn hot enough or long enough to truly clear fortified positions. Richard watched a demonstration on a mock Japanese bunker. The operator advanced to within 20 yards, pulled the trigger, and sent a gout of flame into the firing slit. The fire looked impressive, dramatic even, but when they checked the bunker afterward, scorched walls told only part of the story. A determined enemy could survive that, could wait it out, could emerge firing once the flames died. The instructor's face said everything. This weapon could be better. Between March and June 1944, the Marines refined their approach. Engineers developed the M2 flamethrower, a redesigned model with increased pressure, longer range, and a new fuel formula. They mixed gasoline with a substance that would later be called napalm, a gel made from naphthenate and palmitate, hence the name. This mixture burned at over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, stuck to everything it touched, and couldn't be extinguished with water. The effective range increased to 40 meters, 131 feet. More importantly, the psychological impact proved devastating. Richard volunteered for flamethrower training in July 1944. Most Marines avoided the assignment. Everyone knew the life expectancy statistics. The enemy prioritized flamethrower operators above all other targets. The distinctive silhouette of the fuel tanks, the vulnerable position required to get close enough to use the weapon, the bright muzzle signature when firing. Everything made you a marked man. Japanese snipers trained specifically to identify and eliminate flamethrower operators before they could engage. Average combat survival time, 4 minutes, but Richard understood something others didn't. He'd worked with welding torches since age 12. He knew that fire wasn't just about burning. It was about heat propagation, oxygen consumption, and psychological terror. A bunker wasn't just a defensive position, it was a steel and concrete oven waiting to be lit. And the new M2, with its napalm mixture and extended range, could turn any fortified position into a crematorium before the occupants understood what was happening. Training on the M2 was exhausting. The unit weighed 68 pounds fully loaded, 2 tanks of napalm fuel strapped to a metal frame, plus the wand-like projector rod with its ignition system. You couldn't run with it, couldn't take cover quickly, couldn't do anything but advance deliberately toward your target, while every enemy gun tried to kill you first. Richard practiced for hours, learning to judge distances by eye, understanding wind patterns that could blow flames back toward him, memorizing the exact trigger pressure needed for sustained burn versus quick bursts. His instructor, Gunnery Sergeant William Torres from San Antonio, Texas, was a Tarawa veteran. Torres had seen flamethrowers in action, had watched men die using them, had carried wounded operators off beaches while their fuel tanks leaked and threatened to ignite. He didn't sugarcoat the reality. Listen up, Clawwitter. You're going to be the most hated man on any battlefield. The Japs will do anything to kill you before you get close. Your own men will give you space because you're a walking bomb. You will be alone out there. But you will also save more Marine lives than any rifleman in your company. Every bunker you clear is 20, 30, 50 men who don't have to charge a machine gun. Remember that when you're scared shitless walking toward enemy fire. Richard made friends with another flamethrower operator during training, Private Michael Yancey from Portland, Oregon. Mike was tall, lanky, with a perpetual smile that seemed out of place in the grim business of incendiary warfare. They bunked next to each other, shared cigarettes, talked about home. Mike had a girlfriend named Dorothy. They planned to get married when the war ended. He'd already picked out a house in Portland, a small place near the river. Saved up $400 from pre-war work at a lumber mill. He showed Richard the photograph constantly, Dorothy in a white summer dress, smiling at the camera. "Soon as we get back, I'm making her Mrs. Yancey," Mike said. "You're invited to the wedding. Best man if you want." They shipped out to the Marshall Islands in September 1944. Richard and Mike were assigned to the same company, different platoons. They saw each other in passing. Quick waves, shared rations, brief conversations about nothing important. The kind of friendship you build when you both know the odds are terrible, but refuse to acknowledge it directly. The Marines hit Peleliu on September 15, 1944. The Japanese had turned the island into a fortress. Over 500 fortified caves and bunker systems, many connected by tunnels, all positioned for maximum defensive efficiency. The battle should have lasted 3 days, according to command estimates. It lasted 2 months. Over 700 Marines died. Another 8,000 were wounded. Richard used his M2 for the first time on Peleliu's 4th day. A Japanese bunker complex had pinned down his platoon for 6 hours. 3 men were already dead, 2 more wounded. The squad leader looked at Richard. No words necessary. Richard nodded, checked his fuel pressure gauge, and began walking toward the bunker. Every step felt like moving through thick mud. His legs worked mechanically while his brain screamed at him to run, to hide, to do anything except advance toward that dark firing slit with its patient machine gun. At 40 meters, he could see the gun barrel tracking him. At 30 meters, the first bullets snapped past his head. At 25 meters, he pulled the trigger. The M2 roared, a deep, whooshing sound like a dragon's breath. A stream of orange fire shot forward, liquid flame that seemed to flow rather than spray. It hit the bunker entrance and splashed inside, coating walls and ceiling and floor. The machine gun fire stopped instantly, then the screaming started. The sound wasn't quite human, high-pitched, desperate, the kind of noise that bypasses rational thought and triggers something primal in the brain. Smoke poured from the bunker entrance, thick and black and chemical-smelling. No one came out. Richard stood there, shaking, his finger still on the trigger, though he'd released pressure. His squad advanced past him carefully, giving him wide berth like he was contaminated. Later they found 4 Japanese soldiers inside the bunker. None were recognizable as human beings. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. The screaming echoed in his head. Not battle noise, not gunfire, just that sound. That inhuman shrieking that lasted maybe 10 seconds, but felt eternal. He found Mike Yancey sitting outside his tent, smoking a cigarette in the dark. Mike had used his flamethrower that day, too. They didn't talk about it. Just sat together in silence. 2 19-year-olds who'd crossed a line that most soldiers never approach. The pattern repeated across Peleliu. Bunker after bunker, cave after cave, always the same sequence. Advance under fire, pull trigger, wait for screaming, listen to silence. Richard became efficient, mechanical, emotionally numb. The Marines called him Dragon, half respect, half superstition. They wanted him around because he cleared positions that would otherwise cost lives. They also avoided him, didn't eat with him, didn't joke with him like they did with riflemen or machine gunners. He was necessary and cursed. Between September and November 1944, American intelligence began noticing something strange in Japanese radio intercepts and captured documents. Enemy soldiers had started using a specific term when reporting flamethrower attacks: Tatsujigoku. Intelligence officers initially thought it was a code phrase. A linguist finally translated it: Hell Dragon. Not just dragon, not just fire weapon. Hell Dragon. The phrase appeared in diary entries, in letters found on dead soldiers, in interrogation reports from the handful of prisoners taken alive. One captured document, recovered from a Japanese command post on Peleliu, contained detailed instructions for dealing with American flamethrower units. Priority: 1 target identification. Operator carrying large fuel tanks. Eliminate before weapon range achieved. If Hell Dragon fires, immediate evacuation of position required. Do not attempt to fight fire. Death by burning causes complete loss of combat effectiveness in surviving units. Psychological damage severe and lasting. But the most startling thing wasn't the fear documented in Japanese records. It was what started happening on Iwo Jima in February 1945, something unprecedented in the Pacific War. The Marines invaded Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945. The island was 8 square miles of volcanic ash and rock, honeycombed with tunnels, fortified with over 750 defensive installations. The Japanese commander, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had explicit orders: no banzai charges, no wasteful attacks, just inflict maximum casualties through prepared defenses. He had 21,000 men, abundant ammunition, and every tactical advantage except air and naval superiority. Richard came ashore on the second wave, February 19th, late afternoon. The beach was chaos: incoming artillery, machine gun fire from hidden positions, Marines diving for cover in volcanic sand that provided no protection. Bodies were everywhere. Equipment lay scattered where men had dropped it. The M2 on Richard's back felt even heavier than usual, and he hadn't even begun fighting yet. The battle for Iwo Jima devolved into a nightmare of close-quarters fighting. Every cave, every bunker, every tunnel entrance had to be cleared individually. Standard procedure involved infantry suppression fire, engineers with satchel charges, and finally flamethrower operators to ensure complete clearance. But the Japanese defenders fought with fanatical determination. They'd tunnel behind Marine positions at night, pop up from hidden entrances, attack from multiple directions. The casualty rate was staggering, eventually reaching nearly 70% for some units. Mike Yancey died on February 22nd, 3 days after the landing. His platoon was clearing caves on the northern end of the island. Mike advanced toward a bunker entrance, M2 at ready. A Japanese sniper had positioned himself specifically to target flamethrower operators. 300 yards away, elevated position, clear line of sight. One shot, center mass. Mike went down hard. The fuel tanks didn't explode, contrary to Hollywood mythology. They rarely did unless directly ignited. But Mike bled out before the corpsman reached him. Richard heard about it that evening. He walked to Mike's company area, found the gear laid out for collection. Dorothy's photograph was still tucked in Mike's helmet liner, smiling in her white dress. Richard took the photo, wrapped it in waterproof paper, and put it in his own pack. Someone needed to remember what Mike had been before this. That same day, something extraordinary started happening. Multiple Marine units reported Japanese soldiers emerging from caves and bunkers with hands raised, not from direct assault, but simply when flamethrower operators moved into position. At first, officers thought it was a trick, a suicide attack disguised as surrender. But intelligence officers who could speak Japanese began interviewing prisoners and discovered something remarkable. The Japanese soldiers were surrendering specifically to avoid the flamethrowers. Not out of cowardice, these were the same men who'd fought fanatically for weeks, who'd launched suicide attacks, who'd chosen death over capture in every previous engagement. But the M2 flamethrower broke something fundamental in their combat psychology. The fire didn't offer the clean death of a bullet or even the brutal death of an explosive. It offered prolonged, agonizing immolation in an enclosed space with no escape. One prisoner, a corporal from the 145th Infantry Regiment, explained through a translator, "We could accept death by bullet. Death in battle is honorable, but the fire weapon, the Hell Dragon, it makes the bunker into an oven. You cannot fight it, cannot escape it, cannot die honorably. Men inside the bunker become living torches. They scream and run in circles, spreading fire to others. The sound alone makes strong soldiers lose their minds. We were ordered to fight to the last man, but the Hell Dragon changed that order. Better to surrender than burn." Richard experienced this firsthand on February 23rd, the same day the famous flag was raised on Mount Suribachi. His unit was tasked with clearing bunkers around the mountain's base. He approached one position, M2 ready. Before he could fire, a voice shouted from inside, broken English, heavily accented, "No fire, no fire. We come out." 4 Japanese soldiers emerged with hands raised, weapons dropped inside the bunker entrance. They looked terrified, eyes fixed on Richard's flamethrower. One of them was crying. The squad leader didn't know what to do. Surrender was so rare in the Pacific that many Marines had never seen it happen. But the standing order was clear. Accept surrender when offered. The 4 prisoners were sent to the rear, and the Marines cleared the bunker cautiously. Inside they found ammunition, food, water. The position had been fully stocked and defensible. These men hadn't surrendered because they were out of supplies or surrounded. They'd surrendered because of what Richard carried on his back. This pattern repeated dozens of times across Iwo Jima. By the battle's end in late March, over 200 Japanese soldiers had surrendered rather than face flamethrowers, an unprecedented number in a campaign where most of the 2100 defenders died fighting. Many prisoners specifically mentioned Tatsu Jigoku in interrogations. They described the psychological trauma of hearing flamethrowers used on adjacent positions, of finding the carbonized remains of comrades, of knowing that death by fire offered no spiritual peace. American commanders took notice. If flamethrowers could force surrender, they could reduce casualties on both sides. Tactical doctrine evolved. When approaching fortified positions, Marines would position flamethrower operators visibly, let the defenders see what was coming, and offer a chance to surrender before firing. Sometimes it worked, often it didn't. Many Japanese positions fought to annihilation regardless, but the success rate was higher than any other weapon or tactic tried in the Pacific War. Richard survived Iwo Jima. He used his M2 in 17 separate engagements across the 36-day battle. He was wounded twice, shrapnel from a grenade and a bullet that creased his left arm, but neither injury was serious enough for evacuation. He watched men die around him constantly, watched bunkers vomit flame and smoke, watched prisoners emerge with their hands up and terror in their eyes. He stopped counting after the first week. Numbers became meaningless. The Marines estimated that in Richard's sector alone, his flamethrower cleared positions that would have cost 50 to 70 American casualties if taken by conventional assault. Multiply that across all the flamethrower operators on Iwo Jima, 46 men deployed with M2 units, and the life-saving impact becomes clear. But 23 of those 46 operators died in combat. The 4-minute life expectancy statistic proved grimly accurate. Richard's war ended on Okinawa in June 1945. He'd been in continuous combat since September 1944, 9 months of island warfare, of heat and sand and volcanic rock, of carrying 68 pounds of napalm into enemy fire. He used his flamethrower for the last time on June 18th, clearing a cave complex in southern Okinawa. The Japanese defenders surrendered after he fired a short burst into the cave mouth. 10 men who came out rather than die by fire. He was wounded the next day by mortar fire, serious enough for evacuation to a hospital ship. The war ended while he was recovering in Guam. Richard Clawitter received the Bronze Star for his actions on Iwo Jima. The citation was brief, bureaucratic, mentioning courage under fire and effective employment of special weapons. It didn't mention Mike Yancey or the screaming or the smell of burning human flesh that would stay with Richard for the rest of his life. It didn't mention the Japanese soldiers who chose surrender over fire, breaking centuries of military tradition because of a weapon too terrible to face. He returned to Sheboygan in November 1945, aged 20, looking 40. His father's metalworking shop had closed during the war, so Richard took a job at a factory making engine parts. The work was simple, monotonous, safe. He married a local girl named Alice in 1947, had 3 children, lived in a small house on the east side of town. He never talked about the war. When his son asked about the Bronze Star in a drawer, Richard said he'd gotten it for doing his job and changed the subject. The M2 flamethrower remained in U.S. military service through the Korean War, then gradually phased out as tactical doctrine evolved and international pressure mounted against incendiary weapons. The last flamethrower operators trained in the late 1970s, using modernized versions that bore little resemblance to Richard's M2. The weapon's effectiveness was never questioned, just its morality. In 1968, a military historian researching Pacific War tactics contacted Richard. He'd found Richard's name in after-action reports from Iwo Jima, cross-referenced with Japanese prisoner interrogation records. Several former Japanese soldiers had specifically mentioned an American flamethrower operator who'd given them the chance to surrender, who'd waited before firing, who'd shown restraint that saved lives on both sides. The historian wanted to interview Richard for an oral history project. Richard declined. "Nothing to talk about," he said. "I did what they told me to do, and I came home. That's all." The historian persisted gently. "The Japanese soldiers who surrendered to you, many of them are alive today because you gave them that choice. That's significant. That's worth remembering." Richard was silent for a long moment. Finally, "I didn't give them a choice. I just carried a weapon that scared them so bad they'd rather be prisoners than face it. That's not heroism. That's just terror." Richard Clawitter died in 1994, age 68, of heart failure. His obituary in the Sheboygan Press mentioned his work at the factory, his 3 children and 7 grandchildren, and his service in World War II. No mention of the Bronze Star, no mention of the Hell Dragon, no mention of the estimated 150 to 200 lives, American and Japanese, that his actions had saved across 3 island campaigns. His youngest grandson, clearing out Richard's house after the funeral, found a box in the basement. Inside, the Bronze Star Medal, a faded photograph of a smiling woman in a white dress, and a diary with 3 words written on the first page in Richard's handwriting. "I did this." The M2 flamethrower forced 216 documented Japanese surrenders on Iwo Jima alone, unheard of in a campaign where the expected surrender rate was near 0. Across the Pacific Theater, flamethrowers were directly responsible for clearing over 400 fortified positions, while reducing Marine casualties by an estimated 40 to 60% compared to conventional assault tactics. The psychological impact proved so severe that Japanese military commanders issued formal complaints through diplomatic channels, calling the weapon inhumane and beyond the bounds of civilized warfare. Yet the men who carried those weapons, men like Richard Cloeter and Mike Yancey, received minimal recognition. No special designation, no unit citations, just individual medals that couldn't capture what it meant to carry fire into darkness, to be both savior and monster, to live with the weight of that for the rest of your life. There's a small display at the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico, Virginia. It shows an M2 flamethrower, restored and preserved alongside photographs from Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Our placard explains the weapon's technical specifications, its tactical employment, its role in Pacific Island warfare. At the bottom, in smaller text, flamethrower operators had an average combat life expectancy of 4 minutes, yet their weapons saved thousands of American lives by forcing enemy surrender and reducing casualties in fortified position assaults. No names, no mention of Hell Dragons, no photograph of Mike Yancey's fiancée or Richard Cloeter's quiet death in a Sheboygan nursing home. Just statistics and metal and the sanitized language of military history. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the real cost of war and the men who carried impossible burdens for all of us, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel so these stories don't disappear. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Did someone in your family serve? What do you think about weapons that save lives by inspiring terror? We read every comment, and your engagement keeps these forgotten heroes alive in memory. Thank you for listening, thank you for remembering. These men deserve that much, at least.